Most Jewish people are not so recognizable, but they have contributed a great deal to the world and to Great Britain in many different fields. Every week, British Jews pledge allegiance to the Crown.
He who gives salvation to kings and dominion under princes, may he bless our sovereign Lady Queen Elizabeth, Philip Duke...
And the Jewish contribution to the British Armed Forces has also been exemplary. This program celebrates the loyalty of Jews in the British Armed Forces. Jewish people were allowed to join the armed forces 250 years ago. Since then, they fought loyally alongside their fellow countrymen.
I served in the Royal Navy for some 40 years. I remember most the fortitude of our 200 ships laying siege against the French, and then the bravery of our infantrymen staring death in the face until the order was given, fire! Notwithstanding the death of our leader, Major General Wolfe, we captured Quebec. Canada became His Majesty's colony, and we changed the destiny of English-speaking North America.
In the late 1700s, there were only 25,000 Jews in Britain. Many served in the Napoleonic Wars at every level of all the armed forces, including the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 under Admiral Nelson, and at the pivotal Battle of Waterloo, where Napoleon was finally defeated and peace was returned to Europe. British Jews fought well integrated with their fellow British servicemen against the Russians in Crimea.
Half a league, half a league, half a league onward, all in the valley of death, wrote the 600.
Over 3,000 Jews fought in the bloodiest battles against the Zulus, and then against the Afrikaners in the Boer War, where 127 died. Young Lionel Cohen distinguished himself here as a special forces officer behind enemy lines.
As soldiers and as Englishmen, in Britain's cause they fell, while fighting for the honor of the land they loved so well.
At the beginning of the 20th century, Jewish refugees were fleeing persecution in Eastern Europe. Many fled to England, where anti-Semitism was rising. 55,000 British Jews willingly joined His Majesty's armed forces in World War I. 5 went on to win the Victoria Cross, and over 1,000 received military medals. Issy Smith enlisted when he was only 13. During the Battle of Ypres, 11 years later, he saw his sergeant laying wounded just 200 yards from the German guns. Regardless of personal risk, he and a colleague climbed out of their trench. His colleague was shot in the neck and died immediately. Under heavy German machine gun fire, Issy ran across the battlefield to carry his sergeant to safety, and later that day he brought back many more wounded men. During the war, he was severely gassed and wounded 5 times. For this conspicuous bravery, he was awarded the Victoria Cross, which he celebrated with some friends. In 1915, the first ever British battalions of Jews were formed, the Jewish Labour Corps and the Zion Mule Corps.
I have here, fighting under my orders, a purely Jewish unit. This is the first time in the Christian era such a thing has happened. They number 700 Jewish gentlemen, expelled from their homes in Palestine, and have shown great courage under heavy gunfire.
At Gallipoli in the Dardanelles, their heroism was to become legendary under exposure to continual machine gun fire. In 1917, in the East End of London, the 38th Battalion of the Royal Fusiliers was formed by Jabotinsky and Weitzman. It was nicknamed the Schneider's Battalion. Ben Zvi and Ben Gurion soon formed the 39th Jewish Battalion, and the 40th followed. They were part of General Allenby's army and drove the Turks out of Gaza, Jerusalem, and the rest of Israel. Palestine was no longer under Ottoman rule. It was British. World War I came to an end with the successful campaigning of Field Marshal John Monash, seen here receiving his knighthood from the King.
As an Australian Jew, I was given command of Allied British and colonial troops. After winning the Battle of Amiens, I was given 208,000 men. Aided by tanks, which were a fearful new invention, and many a good Jewish man, we broke through the Western Front.
Facing certain death, the British Allied armies, with a small but significant Jewish contribution, won the battle. Over 2,000 Jews had died for Britain on the battlefields. There was peace at last. But in 1928, Arabs began rioting against Jewish Palestinians in the British Middle East. Louis Sarner, John Brunel Cohen, who lost both legs in World War I, and 1,000 Jewish ex-servicemen founded the organization that became AJEX, the Association of Jewish Ex-Servicemen and Women. They protested against the Arab uprisings and the lack of protection afforded the Jewish Palestinians. They provided welfare services for those disabled in the war, remembrance for the departed, and lobbied against British fascists like Oswald Mosley, and were involved in fights against Nazi sympathizers at Cable Street in the East End of London.
There they would be in uniform and a continuous chant going up of, we have to get rid of the Yids. Our job was to throw hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of these marbles under the hooves of the mounted police that were the escort for Mosley's van with Mosley in it, in order to ensure that, if possible, his march could be stopped. And Mosley never succeeded in his objective of marching through the Jewish East End.
September the 1st, 1939, the Nazis smash across the frontiers of Poland. War is declared.
I am speaking to you in the Cabinet Room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
Encouraged by AJEX, large numbers of young Jewish men and women volunteered to fight in the armed forces. Over 60,000 were to swell the ranks of the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force. 30,000 Jews from Palestine rushed to join the British forces. Over 1,500 went on to receive military awards, and 3